In late March and early April 2020, as the pandemic began its exponential spread, a few visionary friends joined me to talk about the seeds that we see sprouting now. As the old order cracks, as certainty is low, yet social solidarity is high. I call these CoVida conversations, CoVida, life together, because from the virus's point of view, we are one life. We are one body of humanity.
Hey, here we are, Robert. Yay, how's the weather down there?
It looks like it's a little cloudy at the moment.
Yeah, me too.
How amazing.
Amazing. Today I'm talking to Robert Gilman, who is my friend of 30 years, maybe 1984 we met. I think that's more than 30 years. Always an inspiring big picture thinker. And here we are living in the same little town, like a block apart. So lucky me. And I'm going to ask you, Robert, for starters, just to introduce yourself. And I'm going to do a little bit of a, here's the context, as it were. And then have you introduce yourself, reflect, and we're aiming for 15 or 20 minutes, something, the tolerable length of time that somebody casually can listen to this. And so it's someplace more than an interview, less than a podcast. that sweet spot. Great. So, so the context of these conversations, and I'm having about a dozen of them, is connecting with my colleagues. You really could call this the elders of the sustainability movement. And, I know we're talking about resilience and not sustainability anymore, but, when we were radical young people, that's what we talked about. And to reflect on the possibilities that we see in this moment of time, that the dominant, the infrastructure, the internal logic of society has been very hostile to and resistant to, and suddenly things are fluid, and there's a possibility and also a social solidarity. Like, I think we are experiencing what it's like to have the world that we've always seen as possible. So I would like to see, ask you what sparks of possibility you see laying around. And I just want to say to folks that Robert has been a visionary and futurist ever since I've known him. He's been looking at the large patterns way into the future. And so I know this is a common topic for you, but I would like to ask, what new possibilities right now are you seeing for your work going forward? So anyway, take it away, Robert.
Okay, thank you. And just a little bit of background around me. 40 years ago, my late wife, Diane, and I founded something called the North Olympic Living Lightly Association, which was a sort of community networking association. And that evolved into Context Institute, and we published a journal called In Context, a quarterly of humane, sustainable culture that Vicki and friends contributed a number of things to. And then I should also throw in that further back, my background is that I have a PhD in astrophysics and did research in that for a while, but then in the mid-70s decided the stars could wait, but the planet couldn't, and really have been focused on sustainability issues and sustainable culture. An important part of my focus has been that sustainability isn't particularly an environmental idea. The environment may be one of the places where our lack of sustainability shows up, but I like to say there are no environmental problems. There are only environmental symptoms of human problems. And those human problems are rooted deeply in our culture. So my focus really has been on how do we help change the culture? What is the momentum of cultural change that's going on, et cetera, that sort of thing. So I wasn't expecting I can't claim, oh, well, I was expecting this virus.
It wasn't the virus.
It wasn't particularly on my horizon. but things like this certainly are. And I'm currently somewhat jokingly describing the virus as having three subpersonalities. You can think of it as three faces. There's Corona the destroyer, Corona the illuminator, and Corona the accelerator. And so I see all those things going on. Obviously, Corona the destroyer, one of the aspects of that is the people who are dying, and you know, every death has a real impact on the people who are left, as well as obviously the person who dies. But there's a lot more that's being destroyed too. There are patterns that we've seen and thought just were there and couldn't change, and now we're getting a whole new experience of that. And that's part of the illumination also of things. But there's also the illumination of the way in which people have come together. You know, all of this wonderful upwelling of, you know, kind of what can I do? You know, people sewing masks and working on all that PPE stuff. Plus, a lot of the really creative stuff that I'm seeing, you know, isn't coming from the government. Certainly not the federal government. The two of us are in Washington State, and this was one of the first places where the virus kind of took off. And, you know, I don't feel as though the state government has done badly, given that it was at the beginning of all of this. But still, it's been, whether it's the University of Washington virology group jumping right in to develop tests, and that from just much more grassroots kinds of things. I think a lot of the creativity that's happening right now is really emerging out of the whole and not from the obvious centers of power. So I think one of the things that's being illuminated, for me, this is, how do I say this? This is a crisis of modernity. And we live in an age of enlightenment culture. You know, all of our institutions basically, and the philosophy behind them, all go back to the age of enlightenment, which was a huge improvement over what was there before. But it has its real blind spots. And so we're in this place now where I think some of those blind spots are being illuminated. One of those blind spots is a heavy focus on categorical thinking. Age of Enlightenment was enthralled with the idea of finding universal, context-free, timeless truth, which throws away context, throws away, you know, and is arrogant in all kinds of different ways. And the presumption that if we just have the right language-based conversation, we can discover truth. Whereas the best we can really do with language is to get a rough map in a crude shorthand, because the situation that it's trying to describe is so much more incredibly rich. So I think that's part of what we're discovering too. And this will help in terms of ideas that have been lying around. The Age of Enlightenment sees the world through a mechanistic lens. And so we want to be able to design good, manageable systems where we can, you know, it's just a big machine and you just need to put the parts in the right place, et cetera. Society actually isn't that way. Society is much more like an ecosystem in which you have all these different players interacting with each other, adjusting to each other, adjusting here, then adjusting there. And it's much more dynamic. And I think we're getting a chance to see that on kind of fast forward right now, in a way that we don't usually get to see that. Some of the other things that we're getting to see, a really important thing is all the interconnectedness. You know, so another Age of Enlightenment, and I'm beating up on the Age of Enlightenment because I'm enjoying doing that. But the Age of Enlightenment had this idea of objectivity and separation and some beneficial things around individualism, but taken to an extreme that lost connection, lost context. So at the moment, we are rediscovering how interconnected we are. You know, humanity is one body, relative from the point of view of the virus. Another piece here is that we're having an experience of exponential growth in short term. And you and I both know that exponential growth can creep up on you, and then it's gone too far. And one of the challenges of getting people to really take climate change seriously is that it's too slow. This one isn't too slow. And so the whole culture is going to have this memory of what exponential growth is like. So I'm on a roll. Is this good?
It's great. I don't care where you go, just have fun. Yeah.
All right. So there's another thing here that we focus on the virus as the problem. But one of the learnings out of organic gardening, going way back, was that whenever you have something that looks like a, quote, pest, it's a message that your environment isn't as healthy as it could be. So really the virus is illuminating the deficiencies in our immune systems. And I don't mean just our biological immune systems, but also our social immune systems. But everything that I can tell, you know, the first thing that people noticed was that it's older people who tend to die out of all this. But I think as there's been more and more research, it's really the immunocompromised in one way or another. People who have underlying issues. And it just happens that older people tend to have more underlying issues. So at that biological level, it's showing that. But we kind of weren't ready for this, even though we had months when we could have, but we were in denial. And I was too, you know, I'm not going to claim, you know, all I saw, it's took a while for me to kind of grok that, oh, this is going to affect me as well. So let's see, I think I'm going to pause there. Throw it back to you.
Yeah. Oh my God, this is so rich.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about cultural systems versus the state, you know, what the state can do and what culture can do. And I think part of the roadblock for work that you and I have done is that you can influence a subculture, but the state, you know, that you get to a certain level where you can really change things, like with your money or your life, you know, we just because we weren't dangerous to the power system, because we were working at the level of the individual, we got pretty damn far into the social body. I mean, I think there was a year where the word gazingas pin almost was like in the dictionary. So there is a way in which the governance system, which is captured now by the financial system, which is, you know, associated with the monetary system, which is associated with the owners of wealth.
Right.
And, you know, the offshore banking and the mafias, so there is this structure that has captured much of the life energy of the planet in terms of resources and possibilities. And so this is why I have migrated more in recent years politics, to like,
Mhm.
okay, fine, let's address this, and discovered how dense it really is. And so I'd like to riff on, when you said the state, number one, I think that the states have been functioning better by and large than the national government.
Yeah.
And so we have an opportunity to be creative at a state level.
Right.
Because states' rights used to be, code word slavery, but states' rights can also be ecology. It can be ecotopia.
Right.
So we have an opportunity where the state is more fluid than, our state, Washington, is more fluid than the national government, less captured by that sort of the sort of invisible mafia.
Right.
So what the state does is sort of traffic lights. It culture creates, but it creates within a structure of prohibitions, permissions, policies, and purse strings. And so, do you see ways in this moment that, now that the Enlightenment is showing its tattered robes,
Right.
Do you see a way of intervening there to have a more ecologically enlightened governance system the governance system that is more governed, increasingly governed by ecology and decreasingly governed by money? So permissions, prohibitions, purse strings, policies.
Yeah. Well, I think it's useful to think about three components. One of them is what I'm going to call dominance, and it's sort of power in some way or another. And that's the oldest, and it's the crudest. And anyway, I won't go off too much on that. A second is policies. And a third is cultural innovations. And I think it's helpful to have that whole buffet table out in front of you and be opportunistic, to have a sense of where you want to go. And the way that I articulate where I would argue actually the momentum of cultural evolution is carrying us, but it's also where I want to go, is a culture that, as I like to put it, embodies the harmony within, the harmony with others, and the harmony with nature, all simultaneously. So those three harmonies are kind of my way of describing, where I'd like to head. And turns out there are an awful lot of people who would like to live in a culture that really embody, where its institutions and its people really embodied those things. So it's important to have some sense of direction, and also some kind of toolkit and patterns about how you could, in order to respond opportunistically, you can't just depend upon having to invent everything every moment. It's really helpful that, as you and I know, there have been all these small scale initiatives that haven't taken off yet, but that have built up some track record, have worked kinks out. So it's important to know about those and to have a kind of a box of patterns, as it were, because as we move into, right now we're in this time that's, all this ferment going on, but it's going to be hard to make real plans. And that also applies in a certain sense to some of the policy level things. That doesn't mean that we can't work on policies and offer policies, but it's going to be a moving target. But in any case, we can't do anything with policies unless we have some power. Definitely worth it to see what can be done in that realm. But I think one of the fallacies, if you will, of, again, I'll say modernist Age of Enlightenment politics, is the idea that if you can just get power and put certain policies in place, then the machine will create the result. But if the culture isn't there to mesh with it, it doesn't stick. So you have to be able to move on the cultural side as well as any kind of policy side. You know, I spent 7 years in local city government and have a sense for the way that governments are kind of almost inherently a lagging indicator in the culture. And I think part of the frustration on the part of a lot of progressive people is that they want the government to fix them. And there's a certain amount that can be done, but it hasn't been a great success. So anyway, there's another thing that I want to throw in too, and that is that up till now, we've had, you know, those of us in Washington State have had kind of a month of this, and it wasn't like it all immediately changed at the beginning of March. It was a slow progression of, you know, closing the schools and then encouraging people to shelter in place, et cetera. And some parts of that have only been a week. So we've still been kind of adjusting to it in a way that you can do when there's a kind of an immediate shock, and you can say, okay, well, I'll hunker down. We're just beginning. We have at least months of this. And one of the good things about that is that we're now moving into a time that won't be moving at the pace of thought, but will be moving at the pace of biology. The pace of biology, where you're building new neural pathways, is slower but more enduring. And so new habits will be built. And you know, people are going to figure out how to do, you know, how do you function now in this world of one of my friends said, let's call this physical distancing, because, you know, here we are being social. But as we adjust to that, I think that we will build a lot of new habits. And I don't really have a clue. I'm curious. I may have some clue, but I'm curious about how all that is going to manifest. Yeah.
Wow. So what I'm going to take away, because I'm going to, I could sit here and listen to you forever, and I'm guessing there's at least half the people who are watching this who feel the same way, and maybe the others really just want to get on with their day. So we're going to like put a pause here for our interview, but maybe come back in a month and see what we see then.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
Right.
And so a couple of things that I'm taking away. There's so much. I mean, I have a page full of notes. This is, yeah, I think you're going to think it's strange. This is what I picked up. But literacy in exponential growth could be really powerful if we wanted to talk about flattening the climate curve. And I don't know if I just thought that up or somebody, you know, 16,000 people have already said it, but yeah, I would love to develop some language around, some ideas around, my cat's tossing my papers off my desk. Yeah, here she comes. Yeah, you want to join in the party here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just play with that.
Right.
And the other one is this idea of social solidarity. It's all interconnected. Basically, from the point of view of the virus, there's only one body.
Right.
That's really interesting. You know, the virus has revealed to us that we are one humanity. I mean, and so your language about, oh my God, it was so beautiful. The Corona, the destroyer, Corona, the illuminator, and Corona, the accelerator. And these interviews have been like, okay, what's getting accelerated? And do we have any agency there? And of course, the dominant, you know, the upper levels of the mafia are already, you know, putting in levers of police states and stuff. But we do have agency at the level of culture. And part of culture, and this is, I'm going to ask you for one final thing. Part of culture is memes. Part of culture is floating stubs of language that worm their way in to the mind. And, you know, it's like things go better with Coke, right? That's a meme.
Right.
Which they don't. No, sometimes some things do go better with Coke, some with milk.
Right.
But so one of the ones I thought of when I was listening to you was, we're all in this together forever. You add the forever and say, we've just found out that we're all in this together and we're not going to forget that. So if you had a motto or a something, you know, a little sort of belay hook that you could throw up the wall of culture, what would you throw up?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, that's a great question. There's nothing that's really of course, I could say context matters.
Right. Yeah, and that may stick, it may not. Anyway, you think about that. And if we have a talk again in a month, your quiz is, what's the sticky meme that you know, is sort of like, it's like a burr. What's the burr that you can put on somebody's leg so that the whole opening to your teaching, which is amazing, it is available, sort of the good virus. The white virus, not white as in race, but like, you know, the Red Queen and the, anyway, you know, the blue virus or whatever.
The bright virus.
The bright virus, the beautiful virus. Well, we have to think about that, because suddenly I'm talking in territory I don't want to be in. Back out. Okay, so thanks, Robert, so much for this, and I think it's awesome. I'll have it up on YouTube in a few days. And so you have access to it and you can do whatever you want with it. And I'm going to do a big, I recommend this on this video because there's so many cool ideas.
Great.
Okay, so
Wonderful.
Thanks.